A successful businesswoman nearly lost her life when crossing a Manhattan avenue, distracted by work calls. A barefoot homeless boy saved her, but when she offered him money as a reward, his response left her paralyzed. What happened next would shatter everything she believed about success and happiness. Leave a like to keep following our upcoming videos, and don't forget to subscribe to receive more incredible stories like this one. Emma Carter's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of her corner office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across her immaculate desk. At 38, she had everything society deemed successful. Senior vice president position at one of New York's top investment firms, a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, and a string of achievements that made her the envy of her peers. But on this particular Wednesday morning, none of that mattered. The European markets were in chaos, and Emma had been on conference calls since dawn. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from anxious clients and demanding board members. She hadn't even had time for her usual morning coffee from the artisanal cafe downstairs. "Miss Carter, your 10 a.m. is waiting in the conference room." Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Emma glanced at her Cartier watch. She was already running late. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," she responded, gathering her tablet and a stack of reports. Her reflection in the window caught her eye. Perfectly tailored navy suit, not a strand of honey blonde hair out of place, but the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. The morning dragged into afternoon, a blur of meetings and crisis management. By 3 o'clock, Emma's head was pounding. She needed air. Against her usual routine, she decided to walk to her next meeting instead of taking a car. The September air was crisp, and the bustling streets of Manhattan hummed with their familiar energy. As she walked, Emma was deep in conversation on her phone, discussing strategy with London investors. "Listen, James, the numbers don't lie. If we don't act now..." She crossed the street without looking up, her mind completely absorbed in the conversation. She never saw the delivery truck that ran the red light. The screech of tires and blaring horn barely registered before she felt something slam into her, not from the direction of the truck, but from the side. Small but strong hands shoved her roughly, sending her stumbling backward onto the sidewalk. Her phone clattered to the ground as she fell. Gasping, Emma looked up just as the truck roared past, missing her by inches. Where she had been standing just seconds before, a small figure picked himself up from the pavement, a boy, no more than 12 years old, with dark, unruly hair and clothes that had seen better days. He was barefoot, his feet dirty from the city streets. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, the near tragedy already forgotten in the rhythm of city life. But Emma couldn't move. She stared at the boy who had just saved her life, really seeing him for the first time. His face was thin, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent, watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You saved my life," Emma finally managed to say, her voice shaking. She reached for her purse, hands trembling. "Let me give you something." The boy shook his head. "I don't want your money," he said quietly, his voice carrying a maturity beyond his years. Emma paused, confused. In her world, everything had a price. "Then what? I have to give you something." "You saved my life. Please let me help you." The boy, Ethan, he would later tell her, looked at her with those penetrating eyes. His next words would shake the foundations of her carefully constructed world. "I don't need money," he said, "but maybe you could help me find my mother." Emma felt her breath catch. There was something in his voice, in the way he held himself, proud despite his ragged appearance, that struck a chord deep within her. Before she could respond, he continued, "She works in one of these buildings. At least she used to. I've been looking for her, but no one will help a kid like me. They just see..." He gestured to his worn clothes and bare feet. A well-dressed businessman walked past, deliberately avoiding looking at them. Emma noticed how Ethan seemed to shrink, making himself smaller, less noticeable, a survival skill learned too young. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Her phone began ringing again from where it lay on the sidewalk, the screen cracked but still functioning. The caller ID showed it was the CEO, a call she would normally never ignore. But for the first time in years, Emma let it ring. Emma's phone continued to ring, its sound seeming to echo off the surrounding buildings. She glanced at it, then back at Ethan. The boy was starting to step away, clearly expecting her to answer the call and forget about him, like everyone else probably had. "Wait," she said, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. She picked up her phone and, for the first time in her career, declined a call from the CEO. Let's get something to eat. We can talk about your mother." Ethan hesitated, studying her face as if searching for signs of deception. Finally, he nodded. Emma led him to a small deli she sometimes passed, but had never entered. It wasn't the kind of place where successful executives usually dined. Inside, the warmth and smell of fresh bread enveloped them. The elderly man behind the counter raised an eyebrow at the odd pair, but said nothing. Emma ordered sandwiches and watched as Ethan tried to eat slowly, though she could tell he was starving. "Tell me about your mother," she said gently, pushing her own untouched sandwich toward him. Ethan swallowed hard before speaking. "Her name is Sarah Mitchell. She used to work in one of the office buildings around here, doing paperwork and stuff. We lived in Queens, just the two of us." His voice grew quieter. "Then one day, about 8 months ago, she didn't come home." Emma felt her throat tighten. "Did you contact the police?" Ethan's face darkened. "Our neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, called them. They said Mom probably just left, that it happens all the time, but they're wrong. She wouldn't leave me. Something happened to her." Emma's phone buzzed again, this time with messages from her assistant about missed meetings. She ignored them. "What makes you so sure?" "Because," Ethan said, pulling something from his pocket, "she left everything behind, even this." He placed a small silver locket on the table. It was tarnished but clearly valuable, with intricate engravings on its surface. Emma picked it up carefully. "May I?" Ethan nodded. She opened the locket to find a small photo inside, a younger, smiling woman with Ethan's same dark hair and intelligent eyes. But something about the photo tugged at Emma's memory, though she couldn't place why. "She never went anywhere without this," Ethan continued. "It was her mom's, my grandmother's. She said it was our good luck charm." His voice cracked slightly. "The day she disappeared, she left it on her bedside table. She never did that." Emma's analytical mind began working. "You said she worked in an office building around here. Which one?" "I don't know exactly," Ethan admitted. "She didn't talk about work much, but I remember she said something about financial stuff, and the building had a big glass lobby with marble floors." Emma frowned. That description could match dozens of buildings in the financial district. "What about her full name? Maybe I could—" She was interrupted by her phone ringing again. This time, it was James Henderson, her biggest client. Even as her finger moved to decline the call, she saw Ethan starting to stand up. "You should get that," he said with a resigned smile that no child should ever have to wear. "Thanks for the sandwich, but I know you're busy. Everyone around here always is." "No," Emma said firmly, declining the call. "This is more important." She was shocked to realize she meant it. "But we should go somewhere more comfortable to figure this out. My apartment isn't far." She trailed off as she saw fear flicker across Ethan's face. Of course, he was a street-smart kid. Following a stranger home would go against everything he'd learned about survival. "Or," she quickly amended, "we could go to the public library. It's quiet there, and we can use the computers to search for information about your mother." The tension in Ethan's shoulders eased slightly, but he still seemed uncertain. "Why are you helping me, really?" Emma considered her answer carefully. "Because you saved my life. Because you refused money when most people wouldn't. And because—" She paused, realizing the truth as she said it. "Because something about your mother's disappearance doesn't feel right. And when things don't feel right, I need to know why. Ethan studied her for a long moment before nodding. As they left the deli, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting in 15 minutes. Critical situation. Where are you? Emma typed a quick response. Family emergency. Handle it. She turned off her phone before she could see the reply. As they walked toward the library, Emma noticed how Ethan unconsciously matched her pace while maintaining a careful distance. He moved with the hyper-awareness of someone used to watching for threats, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. What had life been like for him these past 8 months? Where have you been staying? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Around, he said vaguely. Mrs. Rodriguez helped for a while, but she got sick and had to move in with her daughter in Jersey. There's a shelter over on 28th, but... He shrugged, leaving the rest unsaid. They were passing another office building when Ethan suddenly stopped, staring at the entrance. This looks familiar somehow. Emma followed his gaze. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the building. It was the headquarters of Blackwood Financial, her company's biggest rival. Before she could say anything, a man in an expensive suit exited the building. When he saw them, specifically Ethan, his face went pale. He quickly turned and hurried in the opposite direction. "Do you know him?" Emma asked, noting how Ethan had tensed up. "No," Ethan said slowly, "but I've seen him before. He was watching me last week when I was looking for Mom near here." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the September breeze. Something was very wrong here, and she was beginning to suspect that finding Ethan's mother would uncover secrets that some people wanted to keep buried. The New York Public Library's grand reading room was quiet, except for the soft tapping of keyboards and occasional whisper. Emma sat beside Ethan at one of the computer terminals, her suit jacket draped over the chair back, sleeves rolled up. She'd already missed 3 important meetings, but for once in her life, work wasn't her priority. "Okay," she said softly, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Let's start with what we know. Sarah Mitchell worked in financial services, disappeared 8 months ago." She typed as she spoke, then frowned at the search results. "There's nothing here about a missing person case." "They didn't really look for her," Ethan said bitterly. "The police said since she was an adult, she probably just left voluntarily. They didn't care that it didn't make sense." Emma opened another tab, using her business credentials to access more detailed databases. What exactly did she do for work? Did she ever mention any company names? Ethan's forehead creased in concentration. "She worked late a lot, especially near the end. She said something about numbers not adding up." He trailed off, then suddenly sat straighter. "Wait, the day before she disappeared, she was really upset. She said something about Blackwood not being what it seemed." Emma's fingers froze over the keyboard. "Blackwood? Are you sure?" "Yeah, that was it. Why? Do you know something about them?" Emma chose her words carefully. "Blackwood Financial is one of the largest investment firms in the city. They're also my company's main competitor." She didn't mention that they were currently in talks about a potential merger, information that wasn't public yet. She typed Sarah's name along with Blackwood into the search, but nothing came up. That itself was strange. Usually, there would at least be some trace of employment records. "This doesn't make sense," Emma muttered, more to herself than Ethan. "It's like someone scrubbed her existence from the system." She was about to try another search when her phone vibrated. She turned it back on to check her emails. It was a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Some questions shouldn't be asked." Emma felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral, not wanting to alarm Ethan. She discreetly took a photo of the message before deleting it. "Let's try something else," she said, pulling out the silver locket. "You said this was your grandmother's." Ethan nodded. "Mom said Grandma gave it to her right before she died, said it was special." Emma examined the locket more closely. The engravings seemed random at first glance, but as she turned it under the library's light, she noticed they formed a pattern. And there, barely visible on the edge, was what looked like a tiny serial number. She typed the number into a specialized search engine she often used for tracking financial documents. To her surprise, it got a hit. The locket had been registered as part of an estate sale 15 years ago. The buyer's name was redacted, but the seller was listed as Mitchell Estate. "Ethan, do you know your mother's maiden name?" He shook his head. She didn't talk much about her family, just said they were gone. Emma was about to dig deeper into the estate records when she noticed a man sitting several tables away, pretending to read but clearly watching them. He was wearing an expensive suit and something about him seemed familiar. "We should go," she said quietly, closing the browser windows. "It's getting late." As they gathered their things, Emma noticed Ethan's bare feet again and made a decision. "We need to get you some shoes and proper clothes." "I told you I don't want your money," Ethan protested. "This isn't charity," Emma replied. "This is practical. We can't investigate properly if you can't walk comfortably. Consider it a business expense." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but then nodded reluctantly. As they left the library, Emma noticed the man in the suit speaking quietly into a phone. They found a small shop still open on a side street. While Ethan tried on shoes, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She used the time to check her work emails. There were dozens, including several marked urgent from the CEO. One subject line caught her eye: Blackwood merger, urgent concerns. It was from Patricia Chen, a junior analyst in her department. Emma opened it, then felt her blood run cold as she read, "Miss Carter, I found some discrepancies in the Blackwood merger documents. There are irregularities in their financial reports from 8 to 9 months ago. Large sums of money being moved through shell companies. I tried to tell Mr. Richardson, but he said to drop it. I think something's wrong." The email was dated 3 days ago. Emma quickly checked Patricia's other messages. There were none. She dialed Patricia's extension, but it went straight to voicemail. "Emma?" Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. He stood before her in new shoes, looking more like a regular kid and less like a street urchin. "Are you okay? You look worried." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Those look good. Let's get a few more things then." She paused, realizing she didn't know what came next. She couldn't just send him back to the streets, but she also couldn't take him home without raising serious legal questions. Before she could figure it out, her phone rang again. This time, it was James Henderson, her biggest client, and she knew she couldn't ignore him forever. "I have to take this," she said apologetically to Ethan. "Wait right here, okay?" She stepped outside the shop, keeping Ethan in view through the window. "James, I'm so sorry about earlier." "Where the hell have you been?" James's voice was tight with anger. "The board is in chaos. Richardson is talking about removing you from the Blackwood merger team. What's going on?" Emma watched Ethan through the window as he examined a warm jacket. In just a few hours, this boy had completely disrupted her carefully ordered life, and somehow she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. "James," she said firmly, "I need you to tell me everything you know about Blackwood's internal audit from 8 months ago." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, James spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know about that?" Before Emma could respond, she saw movement reflected in the shop window. Someone was approaching her from behind. Emma spun around to find Richard Richardson, her company's CEO, standing behind her. His normally immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, a sign of the chaos her absence had caused at the office. "Emma," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "we've been trying to reach you all day." She ended the call with James, slipping her phone into her pocket. "Richard, I can explain. The Blackwood merger is hanging by a thread," he cut her off. "We need you back at the office. Now." His eyes drifted to the shop window where Ethan was visible trying on a jacket. "Whatever charity case you've taken on can wait." Emma felt a surge of protectiveness. "It's not that simple. There are some serious concerns about the merger, like the ones Patricia Chen brought up." Richard's voice took on a harder edge. "She's been dealt with, transferred to our Singapore office this morning." Sometimes people dig too deep into things that don't concern them. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Emma thought of Patricia's email about financial irregularities, about Sarah Mitchell's disappearance 8 months ago, right around the time of Blackwood's internal audit. "What happened during Blackwood's audit?" she asked directly. Richard's face tightened. "That's not your concern. Your job is to make this merger happen. That's why we pay you 7 figures. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't throw away everything you've worked for, Emma. Not for some street kid's wild stories." Inside the shop, Ethan was watching them intently. Emma could see the worry on his face, the expectation of being abandoned again. "I'll be back at the office tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "But right now, I have something important to handle." "Emma?" "Tomorrow morning, Richard." She turned away from him and walked back into the shop. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady as she spoke to the clerk. "We'll take the jacket too. And everything else," he tried on. As they left the shop through the back door, Emma could feel Richard's eyes following them. She led Ethan through a series of side streets, making sure they weren't being followed. "He's your boss?" Ethan asked quietly. "Yes, that was Richard Richardson." He seemed angry. "He is." Emma checked her phone. More missed calls, more urgent messages. "Ethan, I need to ask you something. That day before your mother disappeared, did she bring any documents home? Anything from work?" Ethan's pace slowed. She had a USB drive. She was really nervous about it, said she needed to show it to the right people." His voice dropped. "The drive disappeared with her." Emma's mind raced. If Sarah had found something in Blackwood's records, something about the merger, did she say who she was going to show it to? "No, but—" Ethan stopped suddenly, grabbing Emma's arm. "That's him! The man who was watching me!" Emma followed his gaze. Across the street, hurrying into a black SUV, was Marcus Blake, Blackwood Financial's chief financial officer. As the SUV pulled away, Emma caught a glimpse of the man who had been watching them in the library, sitting in the back seat. "We need somewhere safe to think," Emma said, making a decision. "Somewhere they won't expect us to go." 20 minutes later, they were entering a modest apartment building in a working-class neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez, Ethan's former neighbor, lived in Jersey now, but she had told Ethan about a friend who might help, Maria Suarez, who ran a small cleaning service. Maria opened her door cautiously, then broke into a warm smile when she saw Ethan. She hugged him tightly, rapid Spanish mixing with English, as she fussed over how thin he was. When Emma explained they needed a place to talk safely, Maria ushered them inside without hesitation. The apartment was small but spotless, filled with the smell of cooking rice and beans. Maria sat them at her kitchen table and refused to let them talk until they'd eaten. "Your mother," Maria said to Ethan as she served them. "She came to me the night before she disappeared. She was scared, mi amor. Said she had found something terrible at work. I told her to go to the police, but she said it was too big, that the police couldn't help." Emma leaned forward. "Did she say what she found?" "Only that people would lose everything, that rich men would go to jail." Maria crossed herself. She said she had proof, but needed to show it to someone who could help. The next day, she spread her hands helplessly. Emma's phone vibrated. Another message from an unknown number. "Last warning, walk away." She showed it to Maria, who paled. "They know you're helping him. Dios mío, you need to be careful. These men, they have power." "I'm starting to understand that," Emma said. She looked at Ethan, who was trying to hide how scared he was. "But I also understand that sometimes power isn't enough. Sometimes the truth is more important." Her phone rang again. James Henderson. This time she answered and put it on speaker. "Emma," James's voice was urgent, "I've found something about the audit. There are files." "God, Emma, if this is what I think it is. Meet me at the Grand Central Oyster Bar in an hour. Come alone." The line went dead. Maria touched Emma's hand. "You cannot trust anyone, Senora, not with this." "I've known James for 10 years, Emma said, but uncertainty crept into her voice. The Sarah Mitchell situation had shown her how little she really knew about the people she worked with. "I'm coming with you," Ethan said firmly. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "She's my mother," he insisted. "And you don't know who you can trust. Please." Emma looked at his determined face, so much like his mother's in the locket photo. She thought of Sarah, alone with her discovery, not knowing who to trust. Maybe if she'd had someone on her side. "Okay," she said finally, "but you stay back, out of sight. At the first sign of trouble, you run. Promise me." Ethan nodded solemnly. As they prepared to leave, Maria pressed a small medal into Emma's hand. "San Judas Tadeo," she explained, "patron saint of lost causes and desperate situations." She smiled sadly. "Your Sarah had one just like it." Emma froze. "How did you know her name was Sarah? I never mentioned it." Maria's eyes widened in realization of her mistake. In the sudden silence, they heard footsteps on the stairs outside, heavy footsteps coming closer. Maria moved with surprising speed for her age, ushering them toward the kitchen's back door. "The service stairs," she whispered urgently. "Go now." But before they could move, there was a sharp knock at the front door. "Ms. Suarez," a male voice called. "Building maintenance. We've had reports of a water leak." Emma saw the fear in Maria's eyes and knew instantly it wasn't maintenance. She grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the back door, but he resisted. "We can't leave her," he whispered fiercely. Maria shook her head, pushing them toward the exit. "I've lived through worse in my country. They cannot touch me without questions. Go!" Another knock, harder this time. Maria walked calmly to her kitchen cabinet and turned on the faucet, letting water run loudly. "One moment, please. I'm just cleaning." As Emma and Ethan slipped through the back door, Emma heard Maria begin singing loudly in Spanish, covering any sounds of their escape. They hurried down the narrow service stairs, their footsteps echoing despite their attempts at silence. "Maria knew my mum," Ethan said as they descended. "Really knew her. Not just as a neighbor's friend." "I know," Emma replied quietly. "And she knew we were coming. She was waiting for us." They reached the bottom of the stairs, and Emma carefully pushed open the door that led to the alley behind the building. The space was clear, but she could hear voices at the front of the building. "This way," she said, leading Ethan toward the opposite end of the alley. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together the connections. Maria had been prepared for their arrival, had food ready, knew Sarah's name. They emerged onto a quiet street lined with small businesses. Emma's phone buzzed. A text from James. "Where are you? Time sensitive." She looked at her watch. 40 minutes until the meeting at Grand Central. Every instinct told her it was a trap, but James might have crucial information about Sarah. She needed to know more, but she couldn't risk Ethan's safety. "I have a friend," she said suddenly, remembering. "Someone I trust completely. She lives nearby and can keep you safe while I meet James." "No," Ethan said immediately. "We stick together." "Ethan, listen to me. James is a powerful man with connections throughout the financial world. If he's involved in your mother's disappearance, I can't risk—" "That's exactly why we stay together," Ethan interrupted. "Mom tried to do everything alone, and look what happened. Please, Emma, don't make the same mistake." Before she could respond, her phone rang. An unlisted number. She almost declined it, but something made her answer. Emma Carter. The voice was female, elderly and vaguely familiar. "Yes? My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I believe you have my daughter's locket." Emma's hand tightened on the phone. "Eleanor Mitchell is dead. The estate sale was a cover," the voice interrupted. "Just like Sarah's disappearance was a cover, just like the Blackwood audit was a cover." "You're getting close to the truth, Ms. Carter, but you're not the only one." Emma pulled Ethan into the doorway of a closed shop, lowering her voice. "What do you know about Sarah?" "Not over the phone. There's a diner, Joe's Place, 3 blocks from where you are. 10 minutes. Come alone. I don't leave the boy." A pause. "No, I suppose you wouldn't. Bring him. Hurry." The line went dead. Emma stared at her phone, then at Ethan. That was supposedly your grandmother. Mum said she was dead. She said a lot of things weren't quite true. Emma checked the time again. We have to choose Grand Central or the diner, James or Eleanor. Grandmother, Ethan said without hesitation. James is part of your world, the world that took Mum away. Emma nodded. She sent a quick text to James. Can't make it? Being watched. Then she turned off her phone completely. They found Joe's place exactly where Eleanor had said it would be. A worn but clean diner with windows fogged by grill steam. Through the glass they could see it was nearly empty, except for an elderly woman sitting in a back booth. She looked up as they entered, and Emma felt a shock of recognition. She'd seen that face before, in photos from the Blackwood Financial Archives she'd studied for the merger. Eleanor Mitchell had been one of Blackwood's founding partners 30 years ago. Sit, Eleanor said as they approached. Quickly, we don't have much time. Up close, Eleanor's face showed years of stress, but her eyes were sharp and alert, the same eyes that watched Emma from Ethan's face. She reached out and touched Ethan's cheek with a trembling hand. You look so much like your mother, she whispered. Then her face hardened as she turned to Emma. The merger cannot happen. Blackwood is built on lies, and Sarah found proof. Where is she? Ethan demanded. If you're really my grandmother, why did she tell me you were dead? To protect you, to protect both of you. Eleanor glanced nervously at the door. Sarah isn't dead, but she will be if the merger goes through. She's... The diner's door chimed as two men in dark suits entered. Eleanor's face went pale. Too late, she whispered. They found us. Emma turned to see Marcus Blake, Blackwood's CFO, walking toward their booth. Behind him was Richard Richardson, her own CEO, his face set in grim determination. Ms. Mitchell, Marcus said smoothly, I believe it's time we finished our conversation about your daughter's retirement package. Emma instinctively moved to shield Ethan, her mind racing through options. The diner's only other customers, an elderly couple near the front, were absorbed in their meals, unaware of the tension building in the back booth. The short-order cook had disappeared into the kitchen. Marcus, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her pale face. Still doing Richard's dirty work, I see. Mrs. Mitchell. Richard stepped forward, his tone professionally pleasant, but his eyes cold. Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. We can all walk out of here quietly. Emma felt Ethan trembling beside her, but when he spoke, his voice was clear and angry. Where's my mom? What did you do to her? Marcus's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. Your mother is perfectly safe, young man. She's simply taking an extended sabbatical to consider her options. Options? Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Like the options you gave me when I discovered the first discrepancies? Retire quietly or face destruction? Emma's mind flashed to Patricia Chen, suddenly transferred to Singapore. To Sarah Mitchell, vanished without a trace. To Eleanor Mitchell, officially dead, according to all records. Richard, she said carefully, what's really in those merger documents? Nothing that concerns you anymore, Emma. Richard's voice hardened. In fact, as of this morning, you're on administrative leave pending a review of your recent erratic behavior. The documents show everything, Eleanor said before Emma could respond. Decades of fraud, shell companies, missing pension funds. Sarah found the connection between... That's enough. Marcus's pleasant facade vanished. He reached into his jacket, and Emma caught a glimpse of what could only be a gun holster. Mrs. Mitchell, please come with us. Your daughter would love to see you. So Sarah is alive, Emma said, seizing on this confirmation. Where are you keeping her? Keeping her? Richard raised his eyebrows. My dear, Sarah Mitchell came to us. She understood the bigger picture, just like you need to understand it. But Emma saw Ethan's face crumple at these words, saw the flash of rage across Eleanor's features, and knew it was a lie. The merger announcement is tomorrow, Richard continued. The press conference is at 9. By noon, both companies' stocks will soar. Thousands of jobs preserved, billions in value created, and all the... Historical irregularities will be buried in the transition. You mean the evidence? Eleanor cut in. The proof of what you've stolen. What we've built, Marcus corrected. Now shall we continue this discussion somewhere more private? Emma felt the weight of the silver locket in her pocket. Something about it had been bothering her since she first saw it. The intricate engravings, the hidden serial number. The locket, she said suddenly. It's not just jewelry, is it? Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. Confirmation. Sarah's insurance policy, she said softly. Everything she found, everything she copied. All the proof hidden in plain sight. Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket again, but Richard stopped him with a subtle gesture. Emma, you're one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. Think about what you're doing. Think about your career, your future. I'm thinking about a 12-year-old boy who's been searching for his mother for 8 months, Emma replied. I'm thinking about how many other families have been destroyed by whatever is hidden in those merger documents. Nobody has been destroyed, Richard snapped. We gave Sarah a choice. The same choice we're giving you now. Walk away. Take a generous severance package. Live your life. Like Maria? Ethan spoke up. Is that why men came to her apartment? To give her a choice? Emma saw a flicker of confusion cross Richard's face. He hadn't known about Maria, which meant, Marcus, she said slowly, you've been running your own operation, haven't you? Richard doesn't even know everything. The shift in the air was subtle but immediate. Richard turned slightly to look at his supposed ally, a new wariness in his posture. Marcus? Richard's voice held a dangerous edge. What is he talking about? It doesn't matter, Marcus said shortly. None of this matters. What matters is containing the situation. Now! He reached for his jacket again, but this time Richard grabbed his arm. Not here! Not like this! You don't give the orders anymore, Richard. Marcus shook off his grip. You lost that right when you let the Mitchell woman live, when you let her keep evidence. Evidence of what? Richard demanded. Of everything, Eleanor said quietly. Not just the fraud, the accidents, the disappeared whistleblowers, the families threatened. She looked directly at Marcus. Sarah found it all, every dark secret you buried. The elderly couple finally sensed the tension and hurriedly asked for their check. The waitress, emerging from the kitchen, took one look at the scene and stepped back through the swinging door. Enough, Marcus said. All of you up. We're leaving, now. But Emma had been watching him, had seen him repeatedly check his phone. He was waiting for something, or someone. She drew the locket from her pocket, holding it up. You want this? Fine. But first, you tell us where Sarah is. Put that away, Eleanor hissed. He'll kill us? Emma finished. In broad daylight? In a diner with witnesses and cameras? No, he needs this to look clean. That's why he's been waiting. As if on cue, 2 more men in suits entered the diner. Through the window, Emma saw a black SUV pull up outside. You see? Marcus smiled. We can all leave quietly. Have a civilized discussion about everyone's future. Emma looked at Ethan, saw the fear and determination in his eyes. She thought of Sarah, who had tried to fight alone and lost. Of Eleanor, forced into hiding. Of Maria, who even now might be facing similar threats. Then she looked at Richard, saw the growing realization on his face as he understood the depth of corruption in his own company. She held up the locket again, but this time she wasn't looking at Marcus. Richard, she said quietly, you want to know what's really in those merger documents? Help us. Help us find Sarah Mitchell, because whatever Marcus is hiding, it's bigger than fraud. Bigger than missing money. Isn't it, Marcus? Marcus's smile vanished. The men by the door moved closer, and outside, more black SUVs were pulling up to the curb. The diner had grown eerily quiet. Through the windows, Emma could see more men in dark suits positioning themselves around the building. Marcus's phone buzzed again, and this time he smiled as he read the message. It's over, he said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. The transfer is complete. Even if you expose everything now, the money's gone, untraceable. Richard's face had gone ashen. What transfer? What did you do? What I've been doing for years, Marcus replied. Moving assets, creating shells within shells. The merger was the perfect cover for the biggest transfer yet. By this time tomorrow, billions will have vanished into accounts no one can trace. The pension funds? Eleanor breathed. That's what Sarah discovered. You're not just hiding old crimes. You're actively stealing from thousands of employees. Emma's mind raced. This wasn't just about covering up past fraud. The merger itself was the weapon, the tool to pull off something much bigger. Richard didn't know, she said, watching Marcus's face. You used his ambition for the merger, his desire to beat my company. You used all of us as cover. Richard? Marcus laughed. Richard's been so focused on his corporate kingdom that he never bothered to look at the details. Just like he never looked too closely at what happened to troublesome employees. Sarah looked, Ethan said quietly. That's why you took her. Your mother was smart, Marcus admitted. Too smart. She found a pattern in the accounts that no one was supposed to notice. Started asking questions about missing employees, about certain accidents. Where is she? Ethan demanded. Safe, for now. In fact, Marcus checked his phone again. My associates should be picking her up from her current location as we speak. A mother-son reunion might be nice, don't you think? Assuming everyone cooperates. Emma felt Ethan tense beside her. She squeezed his hand, warning him to stay still. The locket, she said, holding it up. This isn't just proof of what you've done. It's proof of what you're doing right now, isn't it? The account numbers, the transfers. Sarah wasn't just collecting evidence of past crimes. She created a backup, Eleanor said proudly. Everything set to expose the whole operation unless she checked in regularly. Dead man's switch. That's why they couldn't kill her. Richard had been silent, but now he stepped forward. Marcus, stop this. We can still... We? Marcus cut him off. There is no we anymore, Richard. There never was. You were just a figurehead, useful for keeping regulators and shareholders happy while we did the real work. The real work? Emma pressed. You mean the disappearances, the accidents? Sometimes people need to go away, Marcus said simply. Sometimes they need to stay away. Like Sarah Mitchell. Emma's phone suddenly buzzed in her pocket. She had turned it back on when they entered the diner. She pulled it out carefully, keeping the screen angled away from Marcus. It was a text from an unknown number. Back room, service entrance 2 minutes. She deleted it immediately, her heart pounding. Someone else was moving pieces on this board. The money's already gone, she said, playing for time. So why are we still here? Why not just walk away? Because it's not about the money anymore, Eleanor answered before Marcus could speak. It's about staying out of prison. As long as Sarah is alive, as long as that evidence exists, they're all vulnerable. Smart woman, Marcus nodded. You see, Richard, this is why loose ends are dangerous, why they need to be tied up. One of the suits by the door touched his earpiece, then whispered something to Marcus. His face darkened. Change of plans, he said. We're moving, now, all of you. But Richard had finally found his spine. No, he said firmly. This ends here. I'm calling the FBI. He reached for his phone, but Marcus was faster. The gun appeared in his hand smoothly, professionally. That's not happening, Marcus said calmly. Now, Mrs. Mitchell, why don't you and your grandson come with us? I believe Sarah is quite anxious to see you both. Leave the boy out of this, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. He's innocent. No one's innocent, Marcus replied. Emma, the locket now. Emma held it tightly, her eyes on the kitchen door. Had she read the text right? Was help really coming? Emma, Marcus's voice hardened. Don't make this difficult. We have Sarah. We can have Maria too if necessary. We can have anyone you care about. You're right, Emma said slowly. No one's innocent. Not when they stay silent. Not when they look the other way. She turned to Richard. That's what we've all been doing, isn't it? Looking the other way while people disappeared, while families were destroyed. Richard met her gaze, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding. Resolve. You're right, he said. Then, in one swift motion, he lunged at Marcus. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small diner. Richard stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, but he had done what Emma needed. Created chaos, created distraction. The back door burst open. Men in FBI jackets poured in, weapons drawn. And through the kitchen door came a familiar face, James Henderson, Emma's client, followed by several more agents. FBI! Everyone on the ground! Marcus spun toward the new threat, his gun still raised. Emma saw his finger tighten on the trigger. No! Ethan broke free from her grasp, throwing himself forward. Multiple shots rang out, and through the chaos, through the shouting and the breaking glass, Emma heard a woman's voice cry out, "Ethan!" Time seemed to slow as Emma watched Ethan fall. But before she could reach him, a blur of movement crossed her vision. A woman in a worn business suit, her dark hair streaked with grey, throwing herself between Ethan and Marcus. Sarah Mitchell, in the flesh. The FBI agents reacted instantly. 2 shots rang out and Marcus dropped, his gun clattering across the floor. He was clutching his leg, face contorted in pain. The other men in suits were already face down on the ground, agents securing them with handcuffs. "Ethan!" Sarah gathered her son in her arms. He was already sitting up, shaken, but unharmed. The bullet had missed, embedding itself in the diner's wall. "Mom?" Ethan's voice cracked. "Is it really you?" Sarah pulled back just enough to look at his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My brave, smart boy. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I had to stay away." Emma felt a hand on her arm. It was James, looking exhausted but satisfied. "We got them," he said quietly. "All of them. The evidence in the locket was just the beginning." "Your FBI?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. He nodded. "Deep cover, investigating financial crimes. We've been building this case for years, but we could never get enough proof." Then Sarah Mitchell found something we couldn't ignore. Across the room, Richard was being treated by paramedics. The bullet wound in his shoulder, apparently not serious. He caught Emma's eye and gave a slight nod. "Richard called us," James explained, following her gaze. "Last night, after you started asking questions about the audit. He'd been suspicious of Marcus for months, but couldn't prove anything. Your investigation gave him the push he needed." Eleanor had joined Sarah and Ethan, the 3 of them holding each other as if afraid to let go. Emma could see the family resemblance clearly now, the same determined set of their jaws, the same intelligent eyes. "Sarah contacted us 8 months ago," James continued. "She had proof of massive fraud, but before she could get it to us, Marcus's people found out. We managed to get her into protective custody, but they were watching Ethan. She couldn't risk contacting him. So she left the locket," Emma said, understanding now, hoping he'd find someone who could help. "The engravings contain encrypted account numbers, transfer dates, everything needed to prove the fraud. But we couldn't move until we had proof of the new transfers, the ones happening with the merger. We needed to catch them in the act." Emma watched as more FBI agents entered, securing the scene. Marcus was being treated by paramedics, 2 agents standing guard. His face was a mask of cold fury. "What about Maria?" Emma asked suddenly, remembering the men who had come to her apartment. "She's safe," James assured her. "We had agents watching her place. Marcus's men are in custody." Sarah approached them, still holding Ethan's hand. Up close, Emma could see the toll the past 8 months had taken. New lines around her eyes, a weariness in her posture. But there was strength there too, unbroken. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, "for watching over him, for believing him." "He saved my life," Emma replied, "before any of this started. He saw someone in trouble and chose to help, even though the world had given him no reason to trust anyone." "That's Ethan," Sarah smiled proudly. "But it's also you, Ms. Carter. You could have walked away. Many people would have." "Emma," she corrected. "And no, I couldn't. Not once I saw what was happening. Not once I understood what they'd done to your family." Eleanor joined them, her arm around Ethan's shoulders. "The question is, What happens now? Marcus has powerful friends. This won't end here. No, James agreed, but we have everything. The locket, the transfer records, dozens of witnesses ready to testify. And now we have Marcus himself, caught attempting murder in front of FBI agents. The merger? Emma asked. Dead, James confirmed. Both companies will take a hit, but the pension funds are safe. We froze the transfers in time. There will be investigations, reorganizations. And my job? Emma managed a small smile. Well, technically, you're still on administrative leave, James grinned, but I have a feeling the new management might see things differently. Sarah squeezed Ethan's hand. We can go home now, she told him softly. Really home. But Ethan was looking at Emma. Will we still see you? Before Emma could respond, Sarah spoke. Actually, I was hoping to talk to you about that, Emma. What do you know about corporate whistleblower protection programs? Emma raised her eyebrows. Are you offering me a job? Someone needs to help rebuild these companies the right way, Sarah said. Someone who understands both the financial and human sides of the business. Someone who sees people, not just profits. Outside, police sirens were approaching. The elderly couple from the diner were giving statements to FBI agents. The waitress had emerged from the kitchen and was pouring coffee for anyone who wanted it, as if serving hot drinks was the only normal thing left to do. First, Emma said, I think we all need rest, real rest. And time. She looked at Ethan, who was leaning against his mother but still watching Emma intently. Time to process everything that's happened. Sarah nodded, understanding. But there was something else in her expression, something uncertain. There's more, isn't there? Emma asked. Something you haven't told us yet. Sarah exchanged a look with Eleanor, who nodded gravely. Marcus wasn't working alone, Sarah said quietly. What we found, it goes deeper than one company, deeper than fraud. There are others, powerful people, who won't want this exposed. James straightened, suddenly alert. What do you mean? Sarah reached into her pocket and withdrew a small USB drive. This is what I was trying to get to you 8 months ago. The locket was just the beginning. She held out the drive, but before anyone could take it, a commotion erupted at the front of the diner. Through the windows, they could see more black SUVs arriving, but these weren't FBI vehicles. James immediately took charge, speaking rapidly into his radio while other agents moved to secure the diner's entrances. Sarah pulled Ethan closer, shielding him with her body, while Eleanor watched the approaching vehicles with grim recognition. I know those cars, she said quietly. Securities and Exchange Commission. The commissioners themselves. Emma felt a chill. The SEC commissioners didn't make field appearances unless something was very wrong or very big. This is what I was afraid of, Sarah said, clutching the USB drive. Marcus wasn't just stealing money. He was helping others steal too. Judges, regulators, politicians, a whole network. That's why you couldn't go to the authorities, Emma realized. You didn't know who was compromised. James cursed softly. How high up does this go? High enough that I spent 8 months building a sealed case, Sarah replied. High enough that I couldn't trust anyone except a few key agents like yourself. High enough that I had to leave my son. Her voice cracked. The first SEC officials were entering the diner now, led by Commissioner Lawrence Hayes, a man Emma had met at several financial conferences. His usual polished smile was nowhere to be seen. Agent Henderson, Hayes addressed James formally. This is now a federal securities investigation. We'll need to secure all evidence and witnesses. With all due respect, Commissioner, James replied coolly. This is an active FBI crime scene. We have multiple suspects in custody and a situation that requires extreme discretion. Hayes interrupted. He looked at Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, it's time to be reasonable. Think about your son. Emma felt Ethan tense beside her. She stepped forward, placing herself between Hayes and the others. Actually, she said clearly, it's time for everyone to be reasonable and honest. She turned to James. The surveillance isn't just in the locket, is it? You've been recording everything since we walked into this diner. James smiled slightly, tapping his tie clip. Standard procedure. Hayes's face darkened. This is a matter of national financial security. You can't just record evidence of criminal conspiracy. Emma raised an eyebrow. Because that's what this looks like, Commissioner. You showing up personally to suppress evidence, making veiled threats about a child's safety. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Hayes snapped. The implications are exactly why this needs to come out, Sarah interrupted. She stepped forward, still holding Ethan's hand. I've spent my entire career in finance. I understand implications, but I also understand right and wrong. Eleanor moved to stand beside her daughter. Lawrence, she said quietly, you were there when we founded Blackwood. You remember what we wanted to build, not this. Never this. Hayes's expression flickered. Emma saw uncertainty cross his face, quickly replaced by calculation. The market impact, he began, will be managed, Emma said firmly, through proper channels with full transparency. I've handled major corporate crises before. This can be controlled, but not hidden. Not anymore. She looked at Richard, still being treated by paramedics. He nodded slowly. The companies will survive, he said. Different, but cleaner. Better. And the people involved, Hayes demanded, will face justice, James said. All of them. But through due process, not backroom deals. Sarah held up the USB drive. Everything is backed up, Commissioner. Multiple copies, multiple locations. If anything happens to any of us, she didn't need to finish the threat. Hayes looked around the diner, at the FBI agents with their weapons ready, at the local police gathering outside, at the witnesses recording everything on their phones through the windows. The world has changed, Emma said softly. Secrets don't stay buried anymore. The question is, do you want to be remembered as part of the problem or part of the solution? Hayes was silent for a long moment. Emma could almost see him calculating odds, weighing options. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. I know names, he said quietly. People even Ms. Mitchell doesn't know about. People who won't go quietly. Then help us, James said. Work with us. Make it right. Hayes looked at Ethan, still holding his mother's hand, watching everything with those intelligent eyes. Something in his expression changed. My granddaughter is about his age, he said, almost to himself. Then he straightened. I'll need assurances, protection. You'll have it, James promised, but we do this right, everything on record. Emma felt some of the tension leave the room. There would be challenges ahead, battles to fight, but the tide had turned. Sarah was whispering something to Ethan, who suddenly broke into a wide smile. He looked at Emma, then back at his mother, who nodded. Emma? Ethan's voice was hesitant but hopeful. Mom says, she says maybe you could come to dinner sometime, when things settle down. Emma felt tears threatening. I'd like that very much. But before anyone could say more, James's radio crackled urgently. His expression changed as he listened. We need to move, he said sharply. Now. Marcus's people, they're not all accounted for, and they just found Maria's apartment empty, signs of struggle. Sarah's face went pale. No, they couldn't have known. Known what? Emma demanded. Maria, Eleanor whispered. She was my contact. All these years, she helped me stay hidden, helped me watch over Sarah and Ethan. She knows everything. Through the diner's windows, they could see more vehicles approaching fast. Unmarked cars moving with urgent purpose. They're not going to let this end quietly, Hayes said grimly. Are they? The next 12 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. James's FBI team moved everyone to a secure location, while other agents raced to find Maria. Emma found herself in a federal building's conference room, watching the sun rise over Manhattan through bulletproof glass, while Sarah and Hayes provided detailed testimony about the corruption network. Just after dawn, word came through. Maria had been found, shaken but unharmed. She had managed to escape her would-be kidnappers when local police responded to a neighbor's call about suspicious activity. 2 of Marcus's associates were in custody. She's always been tougher than anyone expected, Eleanor said, with obvious relief, just like Sarah. They were all exhausted, but there was still work to be done. Emma sat with Richard, who had returned from the hospital with his arm in a sling, helping him draft the public statements that would be needed. "The markets will open in 2 hours," he said, rubbing his eyes. "This has to be handled perfectly." Emma nodded, thinking of the thousands of employees and investors who would be affected. "We tell the truth, but carefully. Show that we're addressing the corruption, that the core businesses are still sound." "You should be handling this officially," Richard said quietly. "I'm stepping down, of course. The board will need someone they can trust to lead through the transition." Emma looked across the room where Ethan had finally fallen asleep, his head on his mother's lap. Sarah was stroking his hair while still going through documents with James and Hayes. "Actually," Emma said, "I think I know someone better for the job." By mid-morning, the story was breaking across all major news outlets. The FBI and SEC made coordinated announcements about the fraud investigation, the prevented pension theft, and the ongoing corruption probe. As Emma had predicted, stock prices plunged initially, but began to stabilize as details of the preventive actions emerged. 6 arrests so far, James reported, bringing fresh coffee to everyone. "Marcus is cooperating, trying to save himself. His testimony is explosive." Hayes nodded grimly. 3 judges, 2 regulators, and a deputy secretary so far. More to come. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, fully awake and refusing to miss anything. "Now," Sarah answered, "we rebuild, the right way." She looked at Emma. "If you're still interested in that job offer." Emma smiled. "Head of Corporate Ethics and Compliance, with a direct line to the new CEO. Someone needs to make sure this never happens again," Sarah said. "Someone who sees the human side, not just the numbers." She squeezed Ethan's hand. "Someone who stops to help when others look away." Eleanor cleared her throat. "I may know some people. Old guard from the financial world, ones who never approved of what Blackwood became. They could help with the restructuring." "We'll need all the help we can get," Richard admitted. "The road back won't be easy." "The best roads usually aren't," Emma said. 3 months later, Emma stood in her new office, watching the December snow fall over Manhattan. The view wasn't as impressive as her old corner office. This one was only on the 30th floor, but she didn't mind. The signed ethics compliance certificates on her wall meant more than any status symbol. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Don't forget, dinner at 7, Ethan's making his famous spaghetti." Emma smiled. These weekly dinners had become a highlight of her life. Ethan had turned out to be a surprisingly good cook, though his definition of famous was somewhat generous. The transition hadn't been easy. Both companies had suffered significant losses, and rebuilding trust was a daily challenge. But under Sarah's leadership, with support from Eleanor's old contacts and Emma's new compliance frameworks, they were making progress. Maria had moved into Eleanor's guest house, refusing to live anywhere else after everything they'd been through. She still ran her cleaning service, but had also become an unofficial advisor, her street-smart wisdom proving invaluable as they worked to make the company more conscious of its impact on ordinary people. The corruption investigation was ongoing. Marcus and several others had taken plea deals, their testimony leading to more arrests each week. Hayes had kept his word, working with the FBI to expose the network he had once been part of. Richard was doing well in retirement, his shoulder fully healed. He had written a detailed confession about his role in enabling the corruption through willful ignorance, and was now guest lecturing at business schools about corporate ethics. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Ethan carrying his school backpack. "Mum's stuck in a meeting," he explained. "Said I should wait here until she's done." "Perfect timing," Emma said. "I could use your help with something." She showed him a proposal she was working on, a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in financial services careers. "We need fresh perspectives," she explained. "People who understand what it's like to be on the outside looking in." Ethan studied the document with the same intensity he brought to everything. "It's good," he said finally, "but you should add mentorship. Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. Emma thought of that rainy day 3 months ago, when a barefoot boy had saved her life in more ways than one. "You're right," she said. "That's exactly what people need." Her phone buzzed again. Sarah was out of her meeting. As they packed up to leave, Emma paused to look at the framed photo on her desk. It showed all of them at Thanksgiving: Sarah, Ethan, Eleanor, Maria, even James and his family. Not a traditional family, perhaps, but a real one. "Ready?" Ethan asked, holding the door. Emma grabbed her coat, smiling. "Ready." As they headed out into the snowy evening, Emma thought about how much had changed in 3 months. Lives had been destroyed by corruption, yes, but also rebuilt by courage, honesty, and connection. Sometimes she realized the biggest changes start with the smallest choices, like stopping to help someone in need or refusing to look away from what's right. They caught a taxi uptown, where Sarah would be waiting with dinner, where Maria and Eleanor would probably drop by, where stories and laughter would flow freely, where a family pieced together by circumstance and choice would continue to grow stronger. It wasn't the life Emma had imagined for herself, back when success meant corner offices and power lunches. It was better, more real, more human. As Ethan chatted about his school day, Emma felt the weight of the work still ahead, the companies to rebuild, the systems to fix, the trust to restore. But looking at this boy who had changed her life, she knew that anything was possible when people chose to do what's right, one small decision at a time. The taxi turned onto Sarah's street, and Emma saw warm light spilling from the townhouse windows. She was home. They all were.